Another 2 prisoners have been released by accident from a prison in the UK. This after an enhanced regime was meant to be in place to stop it happening again after an earlier mistaken release of a high-profile prisoner. And also this news emerged in a very dramatic way in the middle of Prime Minister's questions at Westminster, which was actually Deputy Prime Minister's questions today. We'll discuss everything that's going on in this latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and shortly I'll be joined by the former John Lewis boss, Charlie Mayfield, to talk about the huge number of people who are missing from the workforce because of ill health, and crucially, what as a nation we have to do about it. But first of all, it was a very intriguing Prime Minister's questions today at lunchtime in Westminster. It's Wednesday after all. Well, first of all, it was Deputy Prime Minister's questions because it was David Lammy, the DPM, facing James Cartlidge, the Shadow Defence Secretary. And James Cartlidge basically asked variations of the same question 5 times to David Lammy. Here's one of those iterations.
I'm asking him a straight question, and I'm going to repeat it once more for the avoidance of doubt, because he didn't answer it twice. He's here to answer questions. Can he reassure the House that since Kebatu was released, no other asylum-seeking offender has been accidentally let out of prison? It's a clear question. Can he give an answer?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Get a grip, man. I know I'm the Justice Secretary. That's why I'm at the dispatch box, also as Deputy Prime Minister. We know that.
It then emerged during that session of Prime Minister's question time that somebody had been released by accident, a convicted sex offender, although he wasn't an asylum seeker, but he was a foreign national who should have been being deported. And then a short while later on Wednesday, we discovered a second prisoner had been released by mistake from the same prison, HMP Wandsworth. So there's a lot going on here, a lot to unpick. In a moment, we'll be joined by Chris Mason from Westminster, who can tell us the political ramifications and also just the slightly weird way that all of this emerged in the House of Commons in real time. But first of all, let's get some of the details as we understand them as we're recording this episode of Newscast just after 6 p.m. on Wednesday from friend of Newscast, Danny Shaw, who is a Home Affairs observer, former advisor to the Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper when Labour were in opposition, and before that, an old colleague of mine at the BBC, where he was a Home Affairs correspondent. Hi, Danny.
Good evening, Adam. Hi, good to be back with you.
Well, I'm glad you said good evening, because that gives me an excuse to say it is 12 minutes past 6 on Wednesday. So as we're talking now, this is the picture as we understand it. So we've got 2 prisoners released in error from the same institution. Talk me through what we know about the first of those.
So the first one that we know about is a man called Brahim Kaddour Sharif. He's an Algerian man. He's 24 years of age. And the key fact is that he shouldn't have been released from Wandsworth Prison, but he was. He was released by mistake on Wednesday of last week. But the Metropolitan Police was only informed about it yesterday, Tuesday. And yesterday evening, we understand that David Lammy, the Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, was told about this mistaken release from Wandsworth Prison. The details as to why he was released and what exactly he was in custody for are still coming in. I've got to say, they're sort of coming in dribs and drabs, and there's a little bit of passing the buck, or, one agency or one government department saying, no, we can't confirm that, you have to go to the Metropolitan Police, and another agency saying, no, that's not for us, which I think tells you everything you need to know about the system and how unjoined up it is and why these mistakes continue to happen. So that's the first one that we've heard about, and potentially the most serious, because he is an Algerian man who is essentially subject to deportation and should probably have been removed from the country 5 years ago when his visa expired. The other prisoner who was released from error from Wandsworth Prison was a man called William Smith. He was let out on Monday, and he is a convicted fraudster. We are told that he was released in error because the court that had sentenced him said that he'd been given a suspended sentence when in fact he'd been given a custodial sentence. A clerical error was made. It was corrected, but the correction was sent to the wrong person. And so, all that happened is that Wandsworth Prison didn't know that he was actually about to be jailed. And in fact, they thought he'd been suspended, so they released him. So there was a mistake there from the court.
And so if we go back to Brahim Kadur Sharif, I mean, the first thing that jumps out at me is that he was released on a day when we were meant to have had an enhanced process for checking that people weren't being released by mistake, having the whole big saga of the foreign national who was released the week before.
Yeah, I mean, this is what's so embarrassing about the whole scandal is that we had the Hadush Kebatu case, the Ethiopian man who had committed sex offences, and that had all sparked problems at the Bell Hotel in Epping. He had been sentenced. He should have been subject to deportation, removed to an immigration centre. He wasn't. He was released in error by Chelmsford Prison, recaptured 48 hours later. David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, stood up in the House of Commons and said, "This is terrible. I've ordered an inquiry. And by the way, I've introduced the most stringent checks on releases of prisoners, and particularly releases of foreign national offenders. There'll be a new checklist that the prison authorities will have to go through before they release someone. And also a deputy governor of every prison will oversee the release of foreign national offenders." Those checks were meant to come into play on Monday of last week. And then on Wednesday, we learned that this man, Brahim Kadur Sharif, an Algerian man, an Algerian foreign offender with a criminal record, a quite lengthy criminal record by all accounts, and a sex offender who was on the sex offenders register, had been freed in error. I mean, it is frankly just, it's beyond belief that could happen. And, where the mistake lies, I don't know. Whether it's a Wandsworth Prison, whether it's other links in the chain, whether it's courts, whether it's in the immigration system, I don't know. But it just, it's the kind of thing, Adam, that does lead to resignations and dismissals of ministers. I'm not calling for that, but it's the sort of error when it comes on top of, a previous egregious error that does lead to people having to leave government because of it.
And Danny, I know you've got to go in a few minutes, but Chris Mason has just arrived at Westminster. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Adam, and hi, Danny.
Hello, Chris. Good to be with you again.
Yeah, nice to have you on Newscast.
And of course, Chris, you've been at Westminster all day. I just meant you've arrived at the Newscast Westminster studio to talk to us. So Danny was just doing the backstory to these two mistakenly released prisoners. He hinted at the political ramifications of this. Do you want to just, before we do the ramifications, do you want to just do the timeline and how this all came out in such an intriguing way at Prime Minister's Questions today?
Yeah, so it had a messy genesis, did this. So it was Prime Minister's Questions, except it was the B team. It was the stand-ins, because the Prime Minister's at the climate summit, the COP summit in Brazil. So it was David Lammy, the Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, and James Cartlidge, who is the Shadow Defence Secretary. You might not be surprised that Kemi Badenoch wouldn't want the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, who is a rather ambitious chap, to have a go at doing Prime Minister's Questions, at least not yet. Anyway, we'll park that. You had a series of questions from James Cartlidge, which were very specific. And so journalistically, I'd gone into the chamber thinking maybe today won't add up to very much because it's the B team. And then James Cartlidge had this specific formulation in his questions, asking if the Deputy Prime Minister could reassure the House that an asylum-seeking offender has been accidentally released from prison. And once he was asking that for the second time, I thought, clearly he knows something that he is seeking to flush out of David Lammy. David Lammy didn't go anywhere near addressing the question directly. He talked about the wider justice system. There was a bit of party political knockabout. And that was that in the chamber. But it was obvious to me something else was going to come. We then get the statement from the Metropolitan Police. Crucially, the fact, the key fact, or the apparently key fact in the Conservative question about us being an asylum seeker was wrong. But it's also true that David Lammy chose not to say anything. Now, I'm told that that decision was made because he felt that the police should say something first. And also they are saying that they wanted to have a reverence for facts. My understanding is, whilst David Lammy had been briefed on what became the case in question, he wasn't certain on entering the chamber whether this gentleman was a asylum seeker or not. So I think he was aware of the limitation of what he knew and therefore concluded politically it was better to say nothing than say something and then potentially find himself it boxed into something of a corner. That said, since then, bit of a political row. Conservatives in the last hour or so saying, as we record at 6:20, he should come back to the chamber, accusing him of potentially misleading the House. But park that sort of micro, if you like, to one side, and just picking up on Danny's contribution as I put my headphones on, and I didn't hear all of your answer there, Danny. But the bigger question, isn't it, for a Justice Secretary is how you go about justifying a justice system that is transparently and palpably and repeatedly failing in that sort of most basic of tasks, which is who should be in prison and who shouldn't be, and when they should be released.
And Danny, just before you go, I was going to say the reason there was confusion about the immigration status of Brahim Kadur Sharif is that he's got quite a complicated backstory.
Yeah, I mean, he arrived, we understand, on a visit visa in the UK in 2019. And in February of 2020, an automatic probable overstayer was put on his record. I take that to mean that his visa had expired and, he should be investigated for potential deportation. Then we had COVID. Understandable that perhaps things began to grind to a halt then. But, in the intervening period, he hasn't been deported, although there was a period of time when he was at Combrook Immigration Removal Centre, which is in West London. Earlier this year, he was there, which suggests that deportation proceedings were quite advanced and his removal to Algeria was going to happen quite soon. And then it appears there were some court appearances and suddenly he ends up in Wandsworth. Now, there's a bit of a gap about what happened, but this is a failure by the Home Office to deport him in the first place, by the Ministry of Justice, because he shouldn't have been released. So two government departments at fault. I think David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, could be given a sort of, a pass for the first release in error that came to light of Hadush Kebatu. Not his fault. Problems further down the chain. He's only recently in post. But I think this one is more problematic for him, and particularly the Prisons Minister, Lord Timpson, James Timpson. I know he's widely respected across the prison sector, by both parties, but prison ministers have gone for less than this. And I think his position is got to be looked at, because this is really serious. I mean, there was a warning the last time this happened with Hadush Kebatu. The government said greater checks are in place, and look what's happened now. And just one other point, we had a review by the Independent Monitoring Board. That's a group of volunteers who go into prisons and do sort of checks and inspections, and they produce a report. And they produced a report on Wandsworth just last month, and it highlighted the chronic shortages of staff at that prison. With some days they are a third of staff are absent on an average day. Some days they have 85 prison officers for 1,400 prisoners. I mean, that's extraordinary. And when the prison visitors went in, they said that staff couldn't even provide them with an accurate number of prisoners that day. Now, that report will have landed on ministers' desks certainly last month, if not before. What have they done about it? Because that's how mistakes happen when you don't have enough staff, or you have very inexperienced staff. They can't even tell you how many prisoners are in the jail. Extraordinary.
Yeah. What's fascinating listening to you, Danny, I mean, your analysis is amazing as always, but I'm just picturing you briefing a shadow cabinet minister about all that stuff, and then them going into the chamber and then doing basically what James Cartlidge did to the government today. That's the case he was making. Danny, thank you very much. I'll let you go.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And so, Chris, you were talking about the opposition parties' responses to this and what they're demanding from David Lammy at the moment. as we're recording at 6:25.
Yeah, so the opposition parties are saying, hang on a minute, surely there is a duty to be more candid when you're in the House of Commons and under the kind of questioning that he was under. There's a frustration about and an anger about David Lammy's manner in the chamber, the way that he responded to the questions from James Cartlidge, which was to brush them off pretty robustly. And so the argument goes from the opposition parties, if he knew something, whatever it was he did know on arriving in the chamber, could he not have said that? Now, as I say, underlying that, or an important context to that, is that a key part of that very carefully written and repeated question from the Conservatives about someone seeking asylum turned out to be wrong. And so did David Lammy think that it was conceivable that that was a reference to a different case, or that sense that he wanted to be careful with the limited amount that he did know? There are certainly, though, questions about should or could he have known more? Should or could he have divulged what he did know at the start of PMQs, or in some other way, or was there a reasonable reason why he didn't, beyond that concern about a lack of knowledge about the full picture? But as I say, I'm conscious as I say all of that, as interesting as that is, and as awkward as it is for David Lammy, that the bigger picture is where Danny was getting to, which is the broader state of the prison service, the justice system, and then certainly within elements of this, when there is the focus on offenders who are foreign nationals or of foreign heritage or asylum seekers, how this becomes if you like, they become case studies in the wider questions about immigration, as well as the questions about the justice system.
Yeah, and I mean, the government clearly thought they'd got a grip of this after the Kebatu release by implementing this enhanced system for releasing people and checking that they were going to the right place or being released in the correct way. I just wonder what they will do next to try and get a grip of it now that we've gone up a level of DEFCON when it comes to problems in the justice system.
This is the thing, isn't it? How do you demonstrate grip? And of course, there's going to be lots of questions asked about how these accidental releases manage to happen, and the various people and agencies and processes and paperwork, a bit like the conversation we had with Charlie Taylor, His Majesty's Inspector of Prisons last week. There's complexity there and a desire for answers. But in the end, from a government minister's perspective, the whole point is that you can demonstrate grip, that you can direct the system, that you can make things happen. And when there is evidence that your ability to do that is either limited or just simply not working, then it's incredibly awkward. Now, yes, in this particular instance, there might be questions for all sorts of justice and home secretaries in this government and the previous one, but in the end, for a government minister, you've got to be able to be seen to be in control. Because if you're not, and we've seen this with the wider and in some instances separate case, and in some cases not, issue around small boats. If there is a big issue that is making headlines that a newscaster might reasonably assume a government would have some control over, and it demonstrably doesn't, that is perilously dangerous for a minister in particular and a government in general.
Chris, thank you very much.
Ta.
Now, as promised, let's play you my conversation with the former boss of John Lewis, Charlie Mayfield, who's done this huge report into what he calls the crisis of ill health in the workplace, what it means for employees, employers, the government, and all of us because of the knock-on effect it has on the economy. And of course, I had to start by asking him about the new John Lewis Christmas advert, which shows a dad being given a record by his teenage son, which takes him back to his clubbing days, which he abandoned when he became a dad. And some people love it and some people hate it. So that is where I started the conversation with Sir Charlie Mayfield. Charlie, hello.
Hello. Hi, Adam. Great to be here.
First questions first, most important. Have you seen the John Lewis Christmas advert? No, I'm kidding. Although I might ask you about that later.
Well, I have actually.
Oh, have you? What do you think of it?
Well, I thought it was good. I mean, when I was there, I left 6 years ago nearly, but the team did some amazing work. And actually, but being a dad for a start.
That was going to be my next question. Does it tug at your dad heartstrings?
Well, it did a bit, yeah. And I think, and being a terrible dancer, but also having a son who now is a bit older, and he's come out of his non-verbal stage, but he certainly went through that. You can sort of relate to it, and I thought it was nicely done. So it was.
I
good.
just wonder if all dads are now going to get records, and not all dads have record players.
I know.
Right, let's talk about what you're actually here to talk about, which is your big review about how we have a healthier workforce. What's the best number that for you encapsulates what a crisis we're facing? Because you do call it a crisis.
Yeah. There are lots of big numbers in the report, and so you can sort of read those. But I always find that they can kind of end up being wallpaper sometimes because everybody bands around big numbers. I think probably the best way to describe it is if you're a young person and you're starting out in work and you're not sure whether you're going to be any good, whether you're going to fit in, all those normal things. If you get onto a track that we obviously all hope people get onto, where they get into work and they sort of find that they're okay at a few things and they feel part of a team and they get onto that track where they end up staying in work, then, on average, in fact, not even average, you're going to earn over £1 million over the course of your lifetime, your working lifetime, and many people much more. However, some of those people find that it doesn't work out that way and they end up on a slippery slope that eventually leads them to leaving work. And if you leave work in your 20s, then you're going to miss out on that million, and you're probably going to cost the state about £1 million. So it's £2 million per person. And since around about 2020, nearly 200,000 young people have left the workforce, largely for mental health reasons. So that's a huge number. Now, we couldn't stop all of that. I mean, it's not possible to say, flick our fingers and make that good. But that's what's at stake. And you know what? I mean, the other thing I'd say is that talking about money and numbers is just one side of the equation. Just imagine the difference in life chances, in how people feel through their lives, the opportunities they get, their sense of purpose, all of these things. Those are just as important.
Well, and also the cold hard cash for employers. What is it? Like a person off sick is £120 of profit per day?
Yeah, exactly. So
which is that's a huge amount of money.
It is a huge amount of money. And so what we have a situation where it's one of these situations where you sort of realise that going through the review, it was a privilege to have the time to go and spend time talking to people. But what you realise is we've ended up in a situation no one wanted.
And also it's one of those slow motion crises that you have to have an opportunity to actually see it, because if it's happening all the time, you don't notice it.
And it's a bit complicated. So, there's bits moving around, and you can't all just say it's all like this or it's all like that. It's more complicated, and that's just the nature of it. But when you stand back and you say, how did we end up here? Because no one wanted this. It's just kind of happened without us realising.
And I know you don't want to do numbers, but there's another big number, which is the cost to the public finances if you add up the benefits bill, the loss of tax revenue, the loss of productivity to the economy. And that is an eye-wateringly large number.
It's huge. Yeah, it's absolutely huge. It's over 200 billion. So it's we say 70% of the income tax revenues. So these are huge numbers. But I think the other point I want to really make, and we tried to make in the review, is that you kind of need to say to people, wake up, this is a really, really big issue and it deserves concentration and attention, and we have to all now get on to fixing it. But the other message that we tried to put across is this is a serious problem, but it's fixable. This is not like we've got to learn to do a whole load of new things. The answers are already here. We already have them. They're just very unevenly distributed.
But let's talk about some of the reasons why this has happened.
Yeah.
The young people's mental health crisis, which everyone who works with young people says is a real thing. Do you have a theory about why that's happened?
There is a noticeable uptick in the incidence of mental health issues amongst young people from about 2014. So this is not a pandemic thing. People seem to think it is. It was made worse by the pandemic through the issues of isolation and stuff. But the trend was absolutely there from way, way before that. And yeah, I don't know. My view, and again, having kids of my own and seeing, actually my two eldest ones sort of grew up out of those teenage years just ahead of the social media wave. And my younger one was sort of just about escaped. But I do think personally, I think social media does have an impact. It means people are sort of in the spotlight all the time. They don't get a break. And life is quite hard. And sometimes you just need to have a break. And it's very difficult. So I think that probably that is a factor, but it's not the only factor.
And then for older people in the workforce, it seems that people are getting sicker younger and sort of sicker in a more complicated way.
Well, so, if you think about an older person, and the great risk in all of this, by the way, is you generalise. And so I just apologise up front for generalising. And I appreciate that what I'm going to say does not apply to everybody and every situation at all, and therefore it might seem, a bit blunt. But if you imagine you're an older person and you have joint pain of some kind, and then you get signed off work and you go home and you're at home with your joint pain, it's not nice being in pain. It gets you down. And if you're also isolated from work and you find that you're not getting the sort of interaction and the sort of affirmation that sometimes you can get from just being with your colleagues and then saying to you, great to see you today, or just talking to you, or sharing a joke, all that kind of stuff, you're isolated from it, then it's very common for what starts as something to do with joint pain can then end up putting you onto the beginnings of sort of early stage mental health issues. And if those aren't addressed, they can then develop. And over time, people can then get themselves into position. It's pernicious because then you become less confident. You feel less able to go back to work because you're feeling less good about yourself.
And also, if you've been off year for work, you find research that shows the chances of you coming back plummet after you've been off for a year.
And this is why, because it compounds. So the longer you're away, the less confident you feel about going back. And so the bigger the effort needs to be put in to help you to come back. And of course, that's sometimes hard to do. It won't always work. So it's a problem. It's kind of what I mean. No one really wanted this, but it ends up snowballing and you end up in this situation. And so we have to engage in that and see, and we can do to stop that happening for people.
And then you've got the work culture that we've got in this country, one aspect of which is that employers are a little bit scared to speak to their employees if they're off sick. And equally, employees are scared about going back to work or what happens if they need to have that conversation too.
Yeah, I mean, I think we went around the country. We had hundreds and hundreds of meetings with people all over the place, and we also went to other countries to look at their operations. And so again, the risk of over summarizing, but one of the things we heard of consistently is there's a lot of fear in here. As you said, people, if you have an ill health condition, and in many ways, particularly if you have a mental health condition, if you have a broken leg, you've got a broken leg. But if you have a mental health condition, you're very unlikely to say, hey, I've got a mental health condition today. So you're afraid of disclosing that. And of course, then your line manager doesn't know that the reason you're not looking great or not performing terribly well is because actually you've got some issue. They just think you're not performing very well. And also the line manager, if they get half a scent that there is a problem with health, they tend to be then also afraid of engaging on that because they don't want to cause offence, because people recognise health is a very personal thing. They definitely don't want to do something which creates a cause for a complaint, let alone a grievance, let alone a tribunal. And I have to tell you that employers I have met, they'll go to quite, they will avoid that. And even to the point that they won't necessarily employ people that they think who could look risky. Now, that's not right. I'm not saying it's right at all, but we should be clear it is happening.
So you're saying that the problem is employers not inquiring, asking, thinking enough about their employees' health. It's not employers being too harsh.
I mean, again, this is where we have to be careful about generalising.
Because every employee is different and every employer is different.
Employer is different. But I think the point of that, I think the significant point is the issue of fear. The reason it matters is it creates distance between people. Almost the reason for it is whatever it is. The consequence of it is it creates distance. People, if they're fearful, they don't talk to each other. And in the context of ill health, if you want to help people, you need people to talk to one another. And so that's what we have to address. And so one of the things we say in the review is that we kind of need to rehumanize the workplace. We have got a situation now where it's not uncommon. If somebody, let's say, if someone is off work for stress, there'll be quite a few HR departments who will say to the line manager, the last thing you should do is phone that person to say, how are you? Because there's a risk that they'll perceive that as you sort of bullying them or pressuring them to come back to work, when it may be you're just phoning them to say, how are you? Yeah. So we've ended up treating people as risks, not as people. And I can understand exactly why that's happened. And there's a rationality to it, but it's not helping us.
So if we then talk about a kind of better world, and you spend a lot of the report talking about solutions, and also it's good because you do a whole list of potential things rather than doing a list of here's what you've definitely got to do. I mean, one of the really kind of obvious ones when you then think about it is, if you have your return to work plan when you're sick now, why not have a not going off sick in the first place plan?
Well, we call it a stay and work plan. I mean, we've said, look, I mean, if we're looking for things that would be good would it be, if we could invent the future, what would be good features of that future? One of them would be that people have return to work plans. But that doesn't, I mean, some employers do it, but that does not exist currently as a regular part of handling ill health in the workplace. And it goes straight to my point, which is that you don't want someone sitting at home, not on their own. We can solve this too, because when maternity, when women participated much more in the workplace, which of course is brilliant, but also when they were pregnant and they were off on maternity leave, there was an issue which came up, which is people started to feel very disassociated and dislocated from work, which was a challenge to them coming back. So we came up with a very simple solution, which is called keeping in touch days. They're now part of maternity and paternity leave arrangements. They're just regular. It's just, nobody blinks.
And these days don't feel like a sort of grenade waiting to go off. They're just quite a normal part.
It's just a completely normal part. And if you're going to have a return to work plan, then the next thing you think about, okay, well, if you're going to have a return to work plan, why not have a stay in work plan? Because if you think about that as an idea, if you can encourage people to say, you know what, I have got a problem, or you can support a line manager so that they can be sensitive and say, actually, I think someone may have an issue here, and I'm going to feel supported and safe to raise that. Then you've identified early. You say, you know what, I think, okay, I get it now. You need to have some time off to have an appointment.
I suppose the issue there is, though, is you can see how you design a system like, after an employee's been off a certain amount of time, you should have a phone call with them and then have a return plan so that they can come back to their job. At what point do you start talking to them about the staying in work plan? That's a much fuzzier, more complicated thing, isn't it?
So there's a big cultural bit to what we're talking about here, which is, again, I think sometimes people look at these situations and they see a big problem and they want to see the way we solve it is we do this, and this, and it's done, and you're done. Human beings are a bit more complicated than that, and there isn't that option here. So, but what you have to do is engage with that. You have to engage with the humanity of the workplace. And so creating and encouraging people to be able to talk to one another is a good thing to do. And of course, when you start thinking about it, there's lots of things we could be doing that we're not doing right now. I mean, if you are somebody with an early stage mental health issue, maybe you're feeling anxious in work, who do you turn to? And actually nowadays, there's technology available. There's AIs that you could very quickly probably stand up a service which you could access completely confidentially. It could really give you good quality advice. I mean, you have to be careful. It could give you bad advice as well.
Also like a work health chatbot.
Absolutely. You could have things like that. And these exist and they actually show some good results in some places, but we're not using them on a broad basis. But the other thing I'd say to you is you've got to think about this through the line manager lens as well. Because they're nervous. Line managers cannot be psychologists. You can't expect that of them. They're busy people who've got stresses and strains of everyday life and all of that as well. And if they're struggling to manage somebody, it's quite a big deal for them to go to HR and say, I'm struggling, can you help me? Because then they're worried that HR might say, they're not a very good line manager. So again, it works both ways. Wouldn't it be great if we could have technology which provided, in the moment, absolutely brilliant advice that people could access easily? So those kinds of things are doable. And I think I see a future where we need to, I'm not saying that's again, it's not a silver bullet, totally not, but there's so much potential for us to address these issues if we name them and then lean in on them.
So do people just have to get used to the idea that in a few years or a few decades time, they might be chatting to a chatbot about their deepest feelings, which is linked to their employment?
Well, so I think we've got to be careful.
And like a chatbot that's kind of programmed by and purchased by their employer.
So I've used an example.
Yeah.
And I think
I've leapt on it.
And we can overuse an example.
Yeah.
So no, I want to, at the heart of this, I want to rehumanize the workplace.
Yeah.
But you see, one of the things you also have to recognize, it's difficult for people to name things. So you need to probably find ways to make it easier for them to at least talk to somebody. I think it's better that someone's talking to a good AI than not talking to anybody.
Yeah.
That is better. It's not a sufficient solution. And hopefully what might happen is the AI helps them to think about, well, how could you raise this? How could you feel safe to raise this with your employer? Meanwhile, for the line manager, same kind of thing, or the employer generally, how do you create a safe environment where people feel able to raise things without being judged? And because if you can raise them early, there's so much you can do to fix them. There really are. There's so much you can do.
And then the idea of fit notes, well, they're not an idea, they're a thing that exists. This is when your GP writes a note for you if you've been off work for a certain amount of time that then affects whether you go back to work or not. I mean, it sounds like that. You talk about we've ended up with a system that no one wanted. That also sounds a bit like a system that no one wanted because it doesn't sound like it works for the GPs, employers or the employees.
Yeah, and let's be clear, I'm not the first person to say this. It's a pretty common view held by a lot of people. And,
it was a big Rishi Sunak policy was to reform it. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it is an issue. It's also something which is not easy to resolve. Otherwise, it probably would have been sorted out. And I think the other point I would stress is that this is not a matter of the GPs not doing their job as such, or sort of signing people off really too easily. I think the way to think about it is in the context of the fit note, the GP is being asked to see the patient and to assess their health condition and how to approach that and improve it, and they're being asked to assess the extent to which that person can work while they're getting better.
Yeah, so a GP has to be an expert in, I don't know, a broadcasting organisation, a plumbing company, a restaurant. Every job you can imagine, a GP has to sort of be a mini expert in to work out what to do.
And they can't do that, and they say that. And I think everybody realises they can't do it, and yet we have got in the system built into the system is a job that they can't do, and as a result, 93% of fit notes say people are not fit for work, which is I think is a sign that they can't do that piece of it. But it's better to say probably that than to say, oh, we'll just carry on anyway. So we have to replace that. But if you go back to what we were saying about return to work plan and a stay in work plan, if you could imagine a world where you've got a return to work plan and it's been agreed between you and your employer and a workplace health professional, always with the option of referring to your GP and keeping your GP in the loop, that bit of the fit note is kind of it's not really needed anymore.
Well, that sounds like even more work for GPs, though. That's multiple conversations with a person.
No, because I think what we're proposing is that this is where the workplace health provision needs to step up and provide some of that. Now, I think the point that I also want to stress here, though, is that nobody is saying that in this situation that you can't go and see your GP. And at the end of the day, anything we stand up within an employment context, if somebody feels unhappy with the outcome and they go to see their GP and the GP as their primary care provider says, well, I don't think this is quite right, then that kind of has to trump all the rest of it. But we think that maybe a large proportion of most of the everyday stuff can be dealt with through this system.
Okay. And
when you talk to GPs, they kind of say, when you say, well, what would happen if somebody has a return to work plan? Most of them say to me, well, we'd probably ask the patient what they think of it. And if the patient says, well, I think I can probably do that, they say, well, that's pretty good then.
The old way of talking about this is, what do employers do? What does the government do? I notice you say the word responsibility quite a lot of times, and you say the responsibility lies with the employee as well.
Yeah.
Do you think we need a little bit of a reset about the responsibilities of workers?
Yeah. I think in a word, what we're saying is,
and I'm not trying to get you to say, we've become a nation of slackers. That's not what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no. I see that, and it's not really that, because I don't think it's nothing is ever as simple as that. But what we do say, very clearly, is that employers need to do a bit more, employees need to do some more, and so does the government. And on the employee piece, essentially what we're saying is, look, a supportive working environment is important. That is it's a good environment in which for you to flourish, and so there are aspects of that are things that you should rightly expect. However, you also have personal responsibility, and some of that personal responsibility is to recognise that not always. It's not about people giving you everything on a plate all the time so you can be your best self. You kind of have to show up and be your best self, and you sometimes will have to show a degree of resilience and stay in a situation where you're not feeling comfortable in order to get through it. And if what you do instead is you disengage from that too quickly and too early, you can set yourself on a path which can lead to long-term disengagement from the workplace, which, by the way, is really bad for you in most cases. It's not good for the economy. It's not good for the employers. I hate my boss is not a health condition. You may hate your boss. Your boss might be a hateful person, in which case something should be done about that. But it may also be that your boss has just told you that what you've done is not good enough, and that needs to be better. And if they're doing that in the right way, they're doing what bosses are meant to do. And actually, they're giving you the opportunity to develop and grow. And so, I think there is a responsibility there that we do need to emphasize, and also ensure that people understand that the alternative of just disengaging probably doesn't solve anything. And in fact, it puts you at real long-term risk of losing out.
This is maybe out of the scope of your review, but can you understand why a young employee who is coping with the cost of living, can't get on the housing ladder, still living at home, why they might feel quite disillusioned about the world of work altogether, not just about what kind of provision there is for their health?
I completely can understand that, and I think what you find in talking to employers and employees about issues of health is that sometimes it's what's happening outside of work, which is creating the issue, which is then manifesting itself in work. You absolutely have to, and again, it's this whole point about needing to take a human perspective on this. We're whole human beings. We aren't just the person at work. We're a whole life and the whole community that we live in. And so the fact is, if you're having a problem with your partner, or there's ill health in your family, or there's also or financial pressures, all those things can be really big influences. And I also take your point that people can become disillusioned. I mean, I think sometimes people say to me, "Oh, is it that we just got sort of people who lack resilience?" I don't agree with that. I think what can unfortunately happen is you can have people who get into a situation where, we live a life of sliding doors. Some people are lucky and the doors slide in the right direction, and the case sometimes they probably do things which help that to happen. But some people aren't lucky and they start without a lot of resilience, and the doors don't slide in the right direction. They have a whole series of bad experiences at work, and then quite rationally, if you're one of those people and you're saying, well, so shall I go back and have what's probably going to be another bad experience at work, or should I do something else? You might think that something else looks more attractive. And I understand that. And I think it's important to understand that, rather than just dismissing people as saying, oh, they just don't like work, they're work shy. It's more complicated than that. And of course, the answer to it lies in trying to encourage employers to do what they can do to help the doors to slide in the right direction. The answer lies in the individual showing some personal responsibility, and not always sort of taking the view that somehow they're disadvantaged or they've been treated badly when they may have been treated perfectly reasonably, and stay in it. And of course, the responsibility is also on government to ensure that the incentives and the sort of encouragement is in the right place to encourage the right outcomes.
Now, I should say to the listeners of Newscast, you've got some papers on the desk in front of you and some notes, and you haven't looked at them once because you know all this stuff like the back of your hand. So I've just had an insight into what it must be like doing a board meeting with you at John Lewis in those days. Pile of papers, doesn't even need to look at them. Charlie, thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam.